All right, and so now we're going to talk about modularity in syntactic processing. So, uh, syntactic processing, that just means that you're processing the syntax of a sentence. And syntax refers to the rules that are involved in combining words into a sentence. So, the way in which you organize words into a sentence, that's the syntax. So, for example, you know that a sentence usually has a subject, a verb, and maybe an object. That would be the syntactic rules. Those would be syntactic rules. So the question is, how do we process sentences? And historically, psycholinguists had believed that the sentence processing was modular. And I'm sure there are many psycholinguists that still think there's some degree of modularity involved. But there are also people who think that, syntactic processing is not as modular as we used to think. And so the modular view thought, asserted that syntactic processing was based on some sort of module, right? That processes syntax of a sentence. And it was believed that other information, such as semantics, the meanings of words, would be used after. So the syntax module would be automatically or mandatorily applied to the sentence. So you would try to figure out the syntax automatically based on the rules of syntax, and that other information like semantics would not be talking to the syntactic module, right? So the idea that there's a syntax module and then a semantics module, and what they're doing is they're doing their own thing, right? They're specialized in some way. This one's processing the syntax of a sentence, this one's processing the semantics, but they're not talking to each other. So in that sense, the module would not only be mandatorily applied, the syntax module, but it would also be informationally encapsulated from other modules or background information. And so, yeah, it wouldn't take any information from semantics right away. And one theory that asserts these two things, right, mandatory application and informational encapsulation, is called the syntax first model. It's also called the garden path model, but I don't want to call it that for reasons that I'll mention later. So we're just going to call it the syntax first model. But first, I need to talk a little bit about phrase structure grammar. Okay. So the whole idea is, imagine if I hear the words the puppy, right? So syntactic processing basically goes, hey, what do I assign? What grammatical category do I assign the puppy to? Well, a puppy is a noun. So, the puppy, that's a noun phrase. And noun phrase belongs to a sentence, probably. Okay. And then when you hear the word damaged, you go, okay, damaged is a verb, which is probably part of a verb phrase. And then the couch is another noun phrase. Here it's the object of the sentence. And so, yeah, that's the idea. And so the whole idea is that the syntax tree is built up incrementally, one at a time, right? So as you're hearing the puppy damage the couch, you're building a syntax tree from the bottom up in an incremental fashion, right? And it also assumes that you can only entertain one interpretation at a time. So you're only building one syntax tree at a time, which we're going to talk about. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So yeah, I just wanted to show you that this can be done with any kind of sentence. You can build a syntax tree with any kind of sentence. This one here is a conjoined sentence, so you can even conjoin sentences and make a syntax tree. Okay, and so imagine if somebody says, "The boy with red shorts kicked the ball and scored a goal." The question is, how do we generate this syntax tree in our minds, so to speak? Right? In other words, how do we parse the sentence or process the syntax of the sentence? And with this came what's called the syntax first model. This is a model used to explain parsing or syntactic processing. It's also called the garden path model, but that's only because it is used to explain sentences in which people are misled or led up the garden path. But the whole idea with this theory is that the syntax tree is gradually built on the from the bottom up and in an online fashion rather than after the sentence is finished. And only one tree can be built at a time. Okay. And so there are multiple Yeah. And so the syntax first model asserts that we attach incoming words to a minimal number of nodes, which we'll talk about in a minute. I'm going to go through this with a sentence. And yeah, we attach incoming words to a minimal number of nodes, and this results in attaching new words to the current clause. Now, late closure is just a byproduct of minimal attachment, so I'm really just going to talk about minimal attachment. Okay. So, for example, the horse raced past the barn fell, right? That's a weird sentence, hopefully, to you. And the correct interpretation is the horse that was raced past the barn fell. That's the correct interpretation. But just to be clear, the horse raced past the barn fell. That's a syntactically fine sentence. There's nothing wrong with this sentence. It follows the rules of syntax. Okay, but just to show you, the horse that was raced past the barn fell, that's the correct interpretation. However, if you're reading this sentence for the first time, the horse raced past the barn fell, what you're going to do is you're going to build a syntax tree. So you're going to say, okay, and you're going to do it online as you're reading the sentence, and you're going to do it in a bottom-up fashion. Okay, so you hear the horse. Okay, so you go, that's a noun phrase, and noun phrases usually belong to sentences. Okay, raced, that's probably a verb phrase, right? And then past the barn, that's going to be a prepositional phrase that belongs to the verb phrase. Now, the problem is that when you get to fell, right, when you read the word fell, you realize that something's wrong, right? And you have to revise your syntax tree. You have to rebuild a new syntax tree that's correct or that makes sense. And so here, notice how there's one, if you follow my cursor here, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 of these sort of units or grammatical nodes. Okay. So there's 5 nodes here. Okay. Well, I'm going to do this sentence here. The correct interpretation is right here. So notice how this the incorrect interpretation of the sentence only has 5 grammatical nodes, whereas the correct interpretation has 7 grammatical nodes. Okay, so this is just a fancy way of showing that the incorrect interpretation is syntactically more simple than the correct interpretation. Okay, so that's what that means by minimal attachment. Minimal attachment just means that we have a bias to build a sentence that's more syntactically simple. Okay, and here are some other garden path model garden path sentences. All right, I'm going to read them like a normal student will read them. So I'm going to read it wrong. Okay, because he always jogs a mile. Well, that's wrong, right? It's because he always jogs, comma, so to speak, a mile seems like a short distance to him. Okay, right. The mechanic maintained the truck. Ah, that's wrong. No, it's the mechanic maintained that the truck was working beautifully. Okay, okay. The complex houses married, what? Complex houses married. Complex houses don't marry things. No, complex is a noun, not an adjective. Oh, okay. So the complex houses married and single soldiers and their families. Okay, great. The girl told the story. What? Cried? No, that's wrong. No, the girl that told the story cried. Okay. And then finally, the man who hunts ducks. What? The man, oh no, it's the man who hunts, comma, ducks out on weekends. Okay. So that's what we mean. You're gradually building the sentence bottom up and once interpretation at a time. And then once you realize, and notice how the syntax, my knowledge about syntax is being mandatorily applied without any influence from a semantics module, for example. Okay, in the next video, we'll talk about a more interactive model of syntactic processing.